Hey all, your OS reviews. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the Nova Smart Ring R. So smart rings are an emerging form of wearables that are posed as a more comfortable and lightweight fitness tracker, replacing some of the functionality from a smartwatch when it comes to tracking your steps, as well as your heart rate 24/7, in addition to your SpO2 blood oxygen, even your sleep, using a design that's just a little bit more inconspicuous, similar to a piece of jewelry that feels more comfortable when you are sleeping just because of the smaller dimensions compared to a watch. And what's kind of interesting about the Nova smart rings is they come in a number of different finishes. The Nova R is the most conventional one, having a brushed titanium finish. It's built out of this alloy material, feeling quite sturdy. That's quite a feat of engineering. So it contains all the sensors, a small charging contact, as well as a tiny battery, but it's sufficient to last around 6 days to almost a week before you have to recharge it again, incredibly enough. So despite being not that much larger than just a regular ring, it's actually surprisingly able to last for longer than expected. And when you do need to top it back up, it comes with this little charger dock that just pops on in a way that almost makes the ring float slightly above the ground, positioning it like a stand, which is rather elegant. And it also uses the heart rate and SpO2 lights to act as a visual indicator when it's charging, as shown here, which is actually quite clever because it's the first time I've seen a smart ring actually use that biometric light to also give you that status info because it doesn't have a built-in screen. And furthermore, if you're not a fan of this particular brushed metal finish, Nova rings have a number of other designs that you can pick between, inclusive of a transparent crystal design, which is rather unique. I've never seen this before on any other smart ring. You can really see the printed PCB board with that Nova logo, although I've been told that the brushed metal finish might just be a little stronger in terms of durability, but this sapphire crystal finish also looks beautiful. Alternatively, available for pre-order currently is their upcoming Nova X, which will have a small built-in screen on the smart ring, a first on this type of wearable, allowing you to actually gauge the time as well. That was one of the missing functions, of course, compared to a true smartwatch. And now this ring is also bringing this functionality on board, making it more of a watch replacement as well, which is pretty cool. But this one isn't available yet, and it sells for roughly $50 more compared to the base $200 version of the Nova R that we have here in front of us. And then last but not least, they also have an upcoming Nova Pay, also in the pre-order stage, which has more of a mysterious kind of onyx black finish. This one here has a built-in NFC chip, allowing you to use it for mobile payments, just scanning it onto kiosks when you're checking out, for example. So if you're looking for more advanced functionality, you can consider those upcoming models versus the currently available Smart R, as well as the Smart Crystal. As for some other top-line specs, these rings are rated for 5 ATM water resistance, up to 50 meters. So if you go for a light swim or shower, it should still survive. Furthermore, the rings are ultra lightweight at roughly just 3 or 4 grams based on the ring size, feeling almost identical to a normal jewelry piece. And the app is also kind of interesting because they have some integration with ChatGPT to provide you with some more AI-generated insights on your patterns and trends. For example, summarizing insights on how you can improve your lifestyle instead of only giving you a number to look at. Furthermore, like most premium fitness trackers, this thing has true 24/7 biometric tracking, including nap tracking anytime during the day. It's not only tracking sleep at the nighttime hours either, so the data is a little bit more helpful, especially if you are more of a road warrior or you're constantly traveling. If your sleep schedule is a little more irregular, this ring can actually still track those patterns, and we'll discuss the accuracy and take a look at the performance later on in this video. So yeah, this is shaping up to be a pretty impressive competitor compared to options we've seen previously, like the Ringcon Smart Ring, the Amazfit Helio Smart Ring. It's a little bit cheaper compared to the roughly $350 that the Ultrahuman Ring Air sells at. This is going to be a little more cost effective. And also the Samsung Galaxy Ring, believe it or not, is nearly $400. So it's 2 times more than this for very similar functionality. Also, the ring is able to store around a week's worth of data on the built-in storage. So you don't have to constantly sync the information over to the phone, which it just does over Bluetooth whenever it's available. Last but not least, Nova also claims that they support some basic activities and sports tracking as well with some workout detection. Around 128 sports here are being advertised. So if you are running, for example, surfing, cycling, you're able to track those trends as well in terms of your heart rate, as well as your calories burned, steps, things like that. Again, similar to a fitness tracker. As far as the setup process is concerned, when you first place an order, you'll receive a sizing kit in the mail, which will look something like this. And it contains some 3D printed kind of plastic rings that are molded in a similar shape as the actual Nova Smart Ring to give you a better idea of what size you should pick. And the size is relatively accurate with some indents and cutouts where the actual sensor on the real smart ring are going to be as well. This little divot, as you can see there, is really just a charging contact, and the dimensions are pretty much a close fit with one another, as demonstrated here using the size 8 of the smart ring. And so it's recommended to wear this typically on your index finger for maybe a day or so, see if the fit here is snug enough, and then you're able to confirm your ring size, arriving in under a week in my experience. So pretty fast there. So it is presented quite well. And then on the inside, you will have access to just the smart ring itself. Underneath, we'll have the quick user guide, as well as a USB Type-C cable, pretty standard stuff. And then at the very bottom is going to be that charging dock, which, by the way, is also built out of aluminum alloy. Charging here using standard Type-C with some soft touch rubber on the back to prevent it from sliding around. And before we take a closer look at the app as well as discuss the performance, here's also kind of a final look at the design. So this titanium finish version feels cold to the touch. There's a small divot here as well that kind of reminds you this is the position where the sensors of the ring should be positioned on the bottom part of your finger like this. So you can more easily know at a glance if it's being worn in the correct orientation or not. I actually like this small touch because most of the other smart rings that I've seen are lacking a notable indicator that you can feel by touch and look. Case in point, here's the Ringcon smart ring as well as the Ultrahuman Ring Air smart rings. As you can tell by comparison, they don't have any type of divots or indicators that part should be at the very bottom of your finger when it's being worn. If it moves around slightly, it's going to be a little less accurate. So I like this small touch. Again, the ring feels quite comfortable and I think looks relatively attractive from a design perspective. It actually has a slightly concurved shape where the metal kind of pushes out a little bit on a ridge. In terms of the profile, you can see some of the striations on the metal there running across the band. And that's a slightly different shape actually compared to the aforementioned Ringcon, which has more of a boxy kind of flattened square shape, as well as the Ultrahuman that has kind of a perfectly flat shape. So even though all three of these smart rings are in kind of a metal finish with a general silver colorway, there are still some minute differences in their design, similar to jewelry that you can kind of pick between based on your preferences. Furthermore, the ring sizes can slightly vary from company to company, so I would definitely recommend taking a measurement or wearing one of the sampler sizes before you order, because if you think, oh, I'm a size 8, I'm going to use that same size across all of these rings, well, that's actually not exactly true. For example, because the Ringcon rings have a bit of a divot as part of their design, you often have to size up by 1 to get an equivalent fit, otherwise it's going to be too tight. And then similarly, Ultrahuman's ring is going to be extremely polished. It's almost a little too smooth on the inside. So you often have to find a size that might be a little bit smaller compared to the others, versus Nova ring is kind of right there in the middle. There's still a little bit of friction using the metal contacts here that provides a nice fit that's not too tight nor too loose. So again, depending on the ring's interior design, you may find yourself ordering a slightly different ring size from company to company. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, as a whole, I am a fan of the Nova Ring's design, and again, it's just fascinating how even with just a metal finish, they're able to achieve such a variance in the level of shine, as well as some small design touches that can still set them apart, just like jewelry. Also, even though it's not as obvious as the crystal edition of the ring, you can still see some of the circuitry underneath the acrylic treatment here on the inside, as well as some smaller details there infused into the acrylic, which is actually quite interesting to observe. And then last but not least, although it's recommended to be worn on the index finger, you can also feel free to kind of fidget around with it a little bit more. For example, placing it on the other hand, it can still function. So there is some flexibility regardless of if you want to wear it left-handed or right-handed. Now, one accessory I would like to see them add in the future, though, would be some type of charging battery case for extra top-ups, kind of like having a mini power bank for the ring to take with you when on the go. This might be an extra add-on they could consider selling in the future, or maybe in a next generation model, I think could make it even more competitive on this aspect. That being said, this feature is also missing on the competing Ultrahuman Ring Air, which also just has a traditional charging dock. So it's still mostly in line with many of the other versions of smart rings on the market, but I think adding this feature could make it even more compelling. Now opening the Nova Ring application, again, it actually syncs over the data pretty quickly once you just swipe down like so and you have Bluetooth turned on. You'll see a progress bar there at the very bottom as the information is getting updated. So actually no issues here from the perspective of connection and pairing. I didn't have any problems at all. It was actually quite seamless. And so from here, you're able to see a top kind of inside section, which is again generated using an AI model. So for example, it tells us that our previous patterns have been a little bit too sedentary and we should try and improve improve our activity just by walking around 30 minutes a day to get us energized. So it's synthesizing this based on some of the patterns that it's observing and collecting from the ring, which is quite helpful. Again, providing some actionable insights. Further down below here, you can see the first tile, which is going to be steps. You can see hours during the day when you were more active, distance converted, calories burned, as well as a weekly view that can also be referenced here, and averages for different days of the week as well. So the UI here is relatively simple and easy to understand. We can also swipe down here to take a look at a calendar view. For example, if I want to jump into a specific date previously. The next tab down is going to be our recovery score. So this takes into account things like sleep, as well as our intensity of activity and movement during the previous day to see how well rested we are for the next day ahead. Can be quite helpful. Now, I will say that because they are leveraging ChatGPT, it looks like some of the AI model servers still have to do a little bit of translation fine-tuning in the sense that currently the recovery tab insights are presented in Chinese for some reason, even though my app here is the English version downloaded from the Google Play Store. So there is a little bit of inconsistency here, which I think will get further ironed out in subsequent software updates. But if we tap inside here, we're able to take a closer look at what this recovery section is corresponding to, also seeing our heart rate data as well. And if we wanted to, we can easily just translate this over, telling us that yesterday's activity was a little bit short of our target, but overall we were doing decently. Furthermore, although sleep duration was shorter, ratio of deep sleep to REM sleep was reasonable, which increased our overall recovery score, and also gives us a kind of inspirational quote there at the bottom: persevere and you will see a better self. So it is a pretty neat idea, although I think because they are just using an API for this particular section, it still seems to require maybe a little bit of fine-tuning on the software side. Hopefully that will be ironed out in the next software update. Although other sections here and tiles are already in English, telling us the percentage goal in terms of activity that we've reached for the current day, as well as a quick gauge on some of the other activity status. Sleep ratio can also be monitored here as well. And this is a good example of it's also tracking the sleep duration, including nap, automatically. I was maybe taking a nap during noon, and it counted that half hour into the total time. Now the next tab over is going to be the daily tag. So this is more of a qualitative metric in which it prompts you to enter how you're feeling subjectively in terms of emotion. Is it going to be a good day? Are you feeling happy? More or less, your mood will get recorded here as well for you to revisit along with your quantitative data metrics. You can also add a more detailed tag and description in terms of what foods you ate, as well as what types of activities you performed, and save it as a memo instead of this app. The next tab over here is going to be more dedicated on sleep. So this one here actually breaks apart the nighttime sleep versus the nap time, which were added together in the previous recover number that we saw there as the total. So from here, you're able to see your sleep stages in a little bit more detail, as well as your sleep efficiency in terms of time in bed versus hours that you've slept, as well as if you are doing okay in terms of timing. If you've gone to sleep too late, for example, it's also going to provide those values for reference. And yeah, I can say from the perspective of sleep tracking, the accuracy on the Nova R was surprisingly very good. But when I was comparing it with some other Amazfit fitness bands, as well as some of those other smart rings previously, the number that I saw on this model was actually right in line, with the overall sleep duration, sleeping versus waking up times, and even naps to be relatively accurate as well, which is actually quite impressive. Furthermore, even as you are sleeping, it's still taking your heart rate, so you're able to track your sleeping average heart rate as well, again offering true 24/7 continuous tracking throughout the entire day. In fact, if we take a closer look at our heart rate data, we can see our resting averages during sleep versus awake. Furthermore, heart rate zone data that breaks it apart based on intensity of activities, like if you're doing light activities versus fat burning, can also be broken apart down below here as well. And then heart rate variability is still using that same sensor, but it's basically just measuring the difference between your slower versus higher heart rates. And on here, a higher HRV value is generally better. So when it comes to the general accuracy of heart rate data, this is another aspect where, similar to the other smart rings I've tested, I found it to be surprisingly not bad. It's actually giving us a similar number, again, to most fitness bands and smartwatches I've tested. So this is doing all right. Now, out of all these metrics here, I would say probably the step count or pedometer is the one which has the biggest room for a little bit more deviance or delta compared to a normal smartwatch. Just because, again, if we're typing on a computer keyboard, we just have some more micro movements on our fingers compared compared to our wrists. However, the calibration here is generally done well enough that it knows the difference between general tapping versus grabbing an object and actually taking a real step to delineate between false positives. So on here, numbers on a smart ring will still be a little bit higher compared to a smartwatch, but it's within a 5 to 10% margin of error in my experience so far that it still gives you a good enough approximation of how you're doing, especially for times of day that you were more active than other times when you were more sedentary. So it's decent enough, I would say. If you want, of course, medical grade accuracy, it's still going to be a slight weakness of this form of wearable as a whole, but in terms of calibration, I will say that the Nova R here is really not bad. Now, the final two metrics here are going to be the SpO2 blood oxygen as well as stress monitoring. The blood oxygen monitoring, though, is one metric on here that's not 24/7, interestingly enough, unlike the heart rate data. So you have to take a manual measurement just by clicking on the app here to trigger that. And after being clicked, you'll see that green light start to flash, taking around 15 seconds or so to get a result. On here, a higher number is also better. It generally indicates that you're breathing properly, having enough oxygen in your blood, versus a lower number under 95% may indicate some difficulty with breathing. Furthermore, there's an exercise record tab that you can access here to trigger a manual workout session, including using connected GPS on your phone. So your phone's GPS will be tracking your location if you're running or cycling outdoors versus indoors. And so now it'll be tracking our heart rate fluctuation second per second, as you can tell, during the entire activity. So during the workout sessions, it will be draining a little bit more power, but you get slightly more accurate data that you can then review for that specific sport or activity that you were performing: basketball, dancing, rowing, so on and so forth. They were able to label using the app over here, over 150 as advertised. So yeah, those are the main metrics on the homepage as the cards, all working decently, I would say. Especially with automatic sleep tracking, it's doing a little better than expected with nap detection. That's quite good. There's also shortcut tabs on the very bottom, and this one is just going to take us directly into the recovery section. Something else I wanted to highlight is, interestingly enough, the kind of AI model there generating some insights that we flagged earlier as having some translation work that can make it even more polished. Interestingly enough, a couple of days ago, I actually saw that the insights were still fully in English, as you can see here. So this is an example of one which has been already fully translated. We didn't need to use Google Translate or anything like that. So I'm assuming there's just a little bit of updates that are being applied there on the back end of their servers that is probably triggering that minor bug at the moment. But as we can tell here, for most days, it's still going to provide us with the accurate recommendations. The middle tab here is reserved exclusively for sleep, and on here able to gauge things in a little bit more granularity and detail, just swiping down. For example, your resting average heart rate as well as your biological clock, indicating your optimal bedtime hours, how you should adjust your sleep to align with your body's biological clock compared to how you've recently slept, as well as a temperature metric is also displayed here. So similar to the Ringcon Smart Ring, you're able to track your skin temperature in terms of comparing your differences over time. For example, were you a little bit warmer or cooler during the night when sleeping? Although interestingly, it doesn't look like we have a breakout metric that tells you the exact degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit of our body, for example. But we still have a graphical chart over here, in addition to a movement chart. This is actually something I've never seen before on the other smart rings. A little bit more detail in terms of how much we were moving at different points in the night. And what's also fascinating is even though blood oxygen or SpO2 can only be manually triggered during the daytime hours, like we mentioned earlier, when you are sleeping at night, it will still take some occasional measurements to see if you're breathing properly or not. As you can tell here, our sleeping blood oxygen levels are being recorded during this specific duration. Now, further down below here, you can also see your longer-term sleep trends for the past week, as well as a sleep chronotype. It will tell you whether you are a early morning type, late morning type, early night, late night, so on and so forth, based on some of your habits. And the next tab over is going to be the meditation section. So if you're feeling stressed or you want to calm down and fall asleep faster, you can play some nature sounds, and these soundscapes are built, again, directly into this app. For example, we can tap here. You can hear a fire burning there versus some water flowing compared to ocean tides. Nature sounds of birds chirping in the distance, as well as falling rain. And you can further tap inside of here, going into Sleep Aid, to further begin a session that will only start for X minutes, or if you're feeling stressed, you can activate this mode as well. So inhaling, exhaling with the indication here, and there's haptic vibrations on the phone that will buzz to notify you of when you should be inhaling and exhaling. and some additional soundscapes that are designed for X duration, including 10 minutes, 5 minutes there just to calm you down. For meditation can also be found down below as ways to just relax. Some of these almost like courses, but just specific soundscapes designed by them, again using your phone's built-in speakers and the voice prompts. Again, sounds to unwind and relax with directly here from the app. The list here is quite exhaustive, including unwinding at the end of a day. There's beach sounds, smile exercise for different types of emotions as well as scenarios.
All that you need to do is relax, breathe, and follow your inner guide. Comes from the Buddhist practice of mudita, which means appreciative joy.
And then last but not least, on the final tab, we're able to gauge if the ring is connected, the current battery percentage remaining, as well as assign different goals in terms of number of steps we want to reach each day. Basic profile info like your height as well as stride length can also be used to better calibrate the ring's accelerometer for motion tracking, accurately counting number of steps. So that is an important piece of info that you'll be prompted to enter. Units can be set between imperial and metric, and you're able to activate the heart rate alert functionality. If it's over a certain number, you will get an alert on your phone, as well as the blood oxygen during sleep functionality that we mentioned earlier as well can be turned on or off to consume less power. That being said, it looks like there are no controls here for turning on the heart rate monitoring, maybe to increase the frequency or having the 24/7 tracking on off, or also blood oxygen tracking during the day are some controls that we currently don't see on the app at the moment. You can also export to integrate the data collected with other services like Strava, and last but not least, there is a function here which is gesture control for camera. This will open a camera interface allowing you to use the motion sensing on the ring to quickly wave around and capture an image, as you can tell there, which can actually be quite helpful if you are trying to capture portraits with a group of people, adding another functionality previously found on smartwatches into the ring form factor, something I actually haven't seen before on other smart rings. I think it's a pretty nice extra idea here. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Nova R Smart Ring, offering yet another option to consider in this emerging wearable category. Again, a form like this can be really comfortable if you do find yourself a little bit more sensitive in terms of your skin with a smartwatch, especially if you're tracking sleep at night. This is just going to feel a little bit more invisible because of the super lightweight design. And like most activity trackers, incredibly, it retains really long battery life, which feels almost possible for something so small, again lasting actually around a week in my testing so far before I had to really recharge it again, offering some small details and touches, whether it's the slightly levitating magnetic charging stand, looking quite neat with the LED indication lights that are missing on the other smart rings, as well as having a little dimple there to indicate how it's being worn properly, over to the good enough accuracy of sleep as well as 24/7 heart rate monitoring for it to be a nice choice if you want just something a little bit more lightweight and stylish. That being said, of course, compared to a true smartwatch, this particular model is still missing a built-in display, which is again something that maybe their next revision will remedy. That will be quite interesting to see. However, if you rely on a smartwatch for notifications, being able to answer phone calls and more advanced functionality, you won't really find this here. However, it can still be an interesting companion wearable if you want to augment it with a traditional watch for timekeeping. You want to seem a little bit more inconspicuous and present in the moment while still collecting some of your health metrics for tracking later on. Those are some cases where a smart ring design like this can still have its benefits. But yeah, ultimately I would say this is a pretty strong competitor to those aforementioned other smart rings that we've seen previously. So if you're interested in something like this, you can check out more details down below. But for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Nova R Smart Ring.